Welcome back to another episode of the 706 podcast, the movie podcast of Blue Apron fans everywhere. We are here today from the studio in Brooklyn, New York. I'm your host today, Anthony, to talk about the movie Transit. But before we get into that, let's go around and introduce ourselves.
Hi, guys. I'm Tony, and I'm just going to say, not into Blue Apron. I'm a home chef guy, all right?
My name's Kirk. I'm unaffiliated and unsullied by sponsorship, as they say.
And hey, what the fuckers, what the fucking ears. This is Mark Marin, your favorite podcast host, here as a guest on the 706.
All right, nice. So we've gone around. So we're here today to talk about Christian Petzold's 2018 film Transit, which we got to say before I give the summary too, Christian Petzold, I think, has a little nostalgic recognition for us because the first film we all saw in theaters together was his earlier work, Phoenix. So that's out of the way. But let's just say that this film, which I think is his follow-up to that, came out in 2018, and it sort of tells a story with shades of kind of, classic Hollywood, maybe sort of shades of German invading France type story. Seems to be all over the place. But at its simplest point, is sort of about a young man who kind of assumes a writer's identity and has to take off from there. I won't give away too much. We'll go into first takes because I know there's a lot of eager speakers here. So we'll go with Kirk first.
So, folks, there's this movie from the 40s. It's called Casablanca. It's a great one. It's a classic. Some might say this is a spiritual successor. I'm not saying it, but some people are saying it. Well, now that I got that out of the way, that was the sound bit for the Spotify ad. But let me say that this movie is quite good, very good actually. I truly enjoyed this film. So yeah, the obvious kind of muse is like a Casablanca living in a fascistic environment and having to make consequential decisions that are at once intimate and far-reaching. I think for me, what separates the two films, among other things, is in Casablanca, as Ebert says, I guess saliently in his review, he says the main crux of the movie is that personal choices can matter on a large scale, where Humphrey Bogart says the problems of three people don't amount to, what is it, like a can of beans or something like that.
Hill of beans.
A hill of beans. All right, so that's a little bit bigger than a can, we would assume.
That's a lot of cans, I think.
Yeah. So, and he says, well, they actually do, because Humphrey Bogart's decision to let Ingrid go could have had far-reaching consequences for the war effort, the resistance effort. So this movie is not as ambitious in terms of the decisions having this consequential power to shape a war per se. I mean, there is a little of that with the doctor, but I think what it's trying to say more, and in a sense it's more accessible for me, or relatable is the better word, is that when you're in an environment such as the one that's presented, where fascists are invading your country and your liberties are being threatened, I think the decisions you're forced to make in and of themselves deprive you of your humanity, and they're inherently dehumanizing. And I think the movie tries to stress that is important. It's important because it's important to people. It affects people's psychologies. It affects their well-being. And so, when we are dehumanized, I think in a grand scale, perhaps an idealistic scale, like, everyone suffers. And so that's what I kind of gravitated towards. I think this movie is really good at kind of putting you into a situation that is very fraught with danger and lethality, but at the same time, the decisions themselves are relatable. And I guess I'm not really describing any particular plot points, so I'm hoping you've seen the movie. But there are certain films where it's like, oh, my whole family got executed, or oh, my whole town got blown to smithereens. And as a viewer, it's hard to relate to those. I mean, you can kind of, in like kind of a roundabout way, you can kind of say, oh, I can relate to the feelings, perhaps, if I were to dial them up to 11. But in this movie, like the idea of leaving somebody, leaving a partner, perhaps for a reason that is not totally of your volition or is more circumstantial, is relatable, and the regret that ensues from that. And so I think that the emotions that were exuded in the film were relatable and accessible for me. And I thought it was quite beautiful throughout. I really did. I think the kind of this time period, it's at once modern, but if you look closely on, I think like Transit Pass, it does say 1940. So the movie's trying to, it's almost like a transmorphic adaptation of World War II. It's very strange in that way because everything else is modern, though perhaps we don't see the true signs of modernity, like, you know, technology, but we do see that the clothing is modern, the transit is modern. I just want to touch on the acting a little bit. Franz Rogowski, really good. You know, I feel like it's like shades of like a young, unleashed Sean Penn. Like I don't know how to really adequately say, but he was so good, as well as Marie, who is Paula Beer. Both of them really, really sold it for me. You know, that one scene where they're going to the harbor to sail away, and she is still you know, he realizes that the only reason she's coming is because she believes her husband, who she's been chasing and who he's imitating, will be on the boat. And he realizes that this is an irrevocable loss for her. This is, you know, she will never move past the fact that it was him all along that she was chasing. So he makes a heart-wrenching decision. You know, they're kissing, they're kind of nuzzling in the car, and it's just this one shot, and you know, of this taxi driving through Marseille, and he says to pull over, and he gets out, and you know, that's that. And that was, oof, that was heart-wrenching for me. So those little moments, they do add up. And I have more to say, but I'll let everybody else go. I know I kind of rambled on, but this movie definitely hit the sweet spot for me in summary of kind of, you know, there's some ambiguity for sure, but at the same time, it's not so obtuse like a cachet for me. Like this is the perfect kind of Goldilocks zone for me of accessibility and emotional kind of nuance that I really love in a film. So yeah, thanks Anthony for showing it.
All right, a lot of great points there. I mean, we'll get back to some of them in the form of a question later, but I think we'll move on to Connor next, who I actually do have a question for, but I'll let you do your take first. So Connor's sort of our, you know, in resident German expert. He's done his degree in fieldwork in German, specializing in 1943. So let's see if anything is
a little earlier than that, a couple of years. No, I'm kidding. I'm not a German expert. I'm interested in 19th century German history. And I like German stuff, and I know the language, and so this was, you know, very special for me, or interesting for me, you know, from that perspective. But yeah, I mean, I would second what Kirk said about what he finally said about how it strikes this balance. You know, I think it's just a movie that I found remarkably mature in its choices, mature in its subject matter, mature, and sort of, I don't know how else to put this. You know, I was really electrified, you know, watching this movie. I was really swept up in it, but I was just captivated. Just what a kind of a story to be told. And of course we can compare it to Casablanca, but I think, and Kirk is right, that it's anchored in sort of on a slightly more, even more individualized level. And, you know, just fundamentally the kind of the melancholic sort of romance of this kind of setting and of this time is just so just captivating. I mean, it's hard to avoid, right? But I think it's so important, and I think part of the movie's aim, or what the movie accomplishes, right, and especially in its choice, again, I think it's kind of a mature choice simply to forego, right, engaging in kind of costume drama of World War II and telling this as, not never disguising that it's about, the Second World War, but simply allowing it to be in the modern day as well. I think just has this amazing quality of capturing what is so important about a film like Casablanca as well, right? Which is the personal stakes of the war, right? The personal effects, even for those who weren't involved in the sort of Hollywood version of the war, right? That is the actual battles. Of course, those battles were not, particularly glorious, right? Or fun to be in, or interesting, or, certainly, right, there's a reality to those as well. But I think we forget, right, the kind of on the human scale of the kind of effects on, just individuals, right? And I think that the way the setting is treated, that is the way the time period is treated, I think allows us to kind of strip away the sort of veneer of the historical, the veneer of the black and white, the veneer of, a certain kind of dress, right? It certainly can feel antiquated, but I think it just helps that much more to just give us a kind of window onto the time. It reminds me a little bit of what, I don't know if you ever watched those restored footage clips, the sort of algorithmically enhanced clips of kind of like silent film, very early film, these like very early documentary film that seem to just shock you with how real they can make a setting seem. And I think this almost does, by kind of even more artificial and kind of artistic means, it does sort of the same thing. It kind of enables us to feel like we're there, right, in a way, and feel kind of the personal stakes of it. It feels like what it would be like to be in that situation. And I really admire the movie for that. But that's just my general take on that approach. And of course, I can talk about many more things. I loved, almost every aspect of this movie. I really, really loved. But I'll close it there.
All right, interesting. I definitely want to touch on the sort of historicity element later on, which Kirk also brought up. But before I move to Tony, I just want to ask before I forget, and you may not feel qualified for this, Connor, but one thing that's always fascinating about the movie is, Georg Franz Rogowski's performance. And we hear him speak German and French throughout the movie. And he has this like really interesting kind of lisp, I think, or like a sort of like inflection. Is that characteristic of him, or do you think that is characteristic maybe of like the fact that his German isn't even like a native type of German? It's like, it just seems, even for me, who doesn't really have a German knowledge, it stood out.
Right. Somehow I was interested. I looked this up. Franz Rogowski, sure, he has maybe a Polish name. I believe he's German born. But he does have a sort of a different kind of voice than you might expect. And I forget where he's from, too. Part of it may be his regional accent. But I think one thing is he has, I think he was born with a cleft palate. You can see there was a sort of repair on his lip. So I think that kind of resulted in a slight lisp that he has, right? Maybe it doesn't account for everything about his voice. But I think that was how I interpreted it anyway. I don't think he's a second language speaker. I don't think. I could be wrong. But like I said, I just looked up a little bit about him. I didn't see anything about that. But I mean, his voice was very important. I mean, I think there was something about that voice and the character that he projects that was just so, so incredible, really, so vital, I think, to the film.
Yeah, very curious. So, okay, we'll move on. I don't want to keep him waiting. Let's get Tony's opinion.
Boy, oh boy, do I guys have a take for you guys? If Casablanca is Game of Thrones season 2, then this is Game of Thrones season 4. No, I don't know. I almost feel bad listening to Kirk and Connor gush about this movie, and I could tell watching it. I'm like, they're gonna love it. Like, I just could feel it. I could just tell this is their kind of movie. They're all gonna respond to different things. I could see the things you guys would respond to in it. And I found myself watching this movie, experience of watching this movie. I was in this place of like constantly trying to kind of solve it, which is never where you want to be when you're watching a movie. You want to experience it, right? You want it to wash over you, even like not that this is like a puzzle movie, but like in general, you want to be in it, right? And I found myself constantly kind of thrown adrift and kind of almost distracted by new confounding details, right? Trying to locate myself in time and place, not necessarily in terms of like, when is this set or whatever, because I can accept, okay, it's kind of this dreamlike thing, right? It's kind of this nexus of time and space. It's every country, it's every place, it's every time. We're bound to this historical event, right? Nazis invading France in World War II, which in a way is the only historical event it could be, because it's such a widely known thing, right? It's what grounds us as an audience. It's like what keeps us kind of tethered to this narrative. Is like, okay, I know enough of what's going on so that we can be set loose in this kind of sea of time and space. That's kind of the context for the story. And, there's a lot of things in this movie that I can appreciate. Like, I love that dreamlike vibe and that tone, that sense of, I think it takes a tremendous amount of confidence to do what this movie does in terms of just like, we're going to set this in the modern day, asterisk in quotes or whatever, and never explain it or never try to contextualize it, just to do that and just make that be a choice from the start. I think that's very bold. It's the kind of thing I really like. The kind of thing better word is probably admire. I really admire this movie, and I admire a lot of the aesthetic choices it makes. I like the way the voiceover is deployed, the kind of slipperiness of who is this narrator, the way it plays with identity and like, who is this guy? Is he actually the writer? Is this the writer? Has the writer died? Is he looking back on his life? Is he dreaming as an old man? Is it the modern day and he's looking back in the past and his regrets? Or is he the husband, or the writer and husband are the same guy? But you know what I mean? Like, he's taking the roles of these different men. He's taking the roles of this boy's dead father who died on this train. And then he's taking the role of this writer, of course. He assumes his name and kind of steps into his role with Marie, the writer's widow. And there's this weird ambiguity where maybe he is the writer because the way she's so affectionate with him and seems to recognize him. And, there's this level of like, there's all the different kinds of distance. You have the different consuls, the different countries, the different times, the different places, the kind of the meta narrative elements. There's a lot of talk about writing. There's a lot of talk about storytelling. There's just all these things in the movie. There's all these ideas in the movie. It's so dense. It's so packed with ideas, which normally I find very exciting and very interesting, but all it did was kind of leave me feeling like I didn't know what to grab onto. I didn't have an emotional like anchor in this movie. I could see the tone it was going for, kind of that mournfulness, kind of that sadness, kind of the idea of lost love. But I was so kind of confused by the central relationship, and I didn't really know what to make of it, that I almost couldn't be invested in it. I'm like, okay, so is she the wife? Is she not? Maybe that seems like a very dumb concern. I don't know. I mean, I like to pride myself on being able to go along with these sorts of things, but I don't know. I didn't have an emotional into it. And I found myself very frustrated by it, for the most part. I mean, there's a lot of little things I wrote, a lot of little moments and details that I thought were cool or like interesting, but ultimately when the movie ended, I was kind of like, okay, like, all right, like, I don't know. And I wish I liked it more, because I can see what you guys liked about it. I get why you liked it. And I just could not connect to it in that way. It just did not, there was something missing for me.
All right. Very interesting. I think, some of your points, maybe we'll get back to, maybe we'll pull them out. Maybe we'll convince you otherwise. Maybe not. Maybe you'll convince us otherwise. I think it's always great to have someone sort of object, but
not like this, Tony. No, I'm kidding. Of course, it's always good.
Yeah,
dissenting opinions.
Yes, exactly. It's to think about the movie, though, for me, is almost the opposite reaction. I saw this movie in theaters at the IFC, the same place we saw Phoenix, and I was instantly floored. And I've seen it about 5 or 6 times, honestly, since. It's become one of my favorite movies, kind of like of the last 10 so many years. And when I pitched it to Kirk, and I pitched it to him quite a bit, I think, on and off this podcast, I described it as an Anthony film, and I think it's totally true for a lot of different reasons. But to go over my own sort of take is, I think each of you have brought up Casablanca in some relation or another, and I think that's absolutely right. It's the obvious kind of filmic touchstone. The other obvious one is, of course, that it's based on a book also named Transit, which is directly involved in the 1940s in the German invasion of France, and is kind of a mediocre melodramatic novel. And I think what Petzold does is much more interesting and fascinating. But I think for me, the way I think about it is, I think a lot of critics get caught up in the kind of the 1940s elements. The idea of World War II being the sort of obvious touchstone, and the idea maybe that like we're still enduring the sort of effects of that sort of crises, at least in some form or another. Like, you know, of course, we could make allusions to the refugee crisis happening across Europe and the Middle East throughout the movie, I think. But I think for me, the kind of the real truth of the movie lies in what Kirk was almost getting at, the sort of dehumanizing nature. And I think rather than being the past kind of haunting over the film and the kind of the present that we can't get away from all these kind of horrors, really what we're seeing is that we can't ever get a grasp on our own present, that there is no absolute way of understanding how we are here and now. And every time we attempt to, we only end up more dehumanized. We end up like refugees. We end up like, you know, ghosts. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they're always chasing after or lusting after the kind of person who's not there. You know, she may want Jorg, our kind of main guy, but when he's there, she kind of wants the doctor. When the doctor's there, she kind of wants Jorg. And when she finally has kind of both in her grasp, she of course goes back to her husband, Marie, Paula Bear's character, who gives a really fascinating sort of performance. And so I think when I watch this movie, I get kind of like Kirk was saying, is like there's something fearful about this sort of very simple idea of having these really basic, honest ideas and feelings and never being able to really express them and get them across. Because the realization is you're never who you are, or you're never being able to be understood as who you are. You're always thought of as someone else, I think. And I think that's a really kind of a core, simple, basic idea. But for me, the movie delivers it very beautifully. Like I said, I was absolutely floored by it. And I think what Tony was saying about the dream logic of the movie is absolutely true. And I think all of us could probably be accused of using that defense for a movie at various times. But I think it is, in this particular case, like, there's so many different types of holes if you really want to pick at it, if you really kind of want to like fall away from it. You know, like, does he really look like, you know, the writer to get away with all this? You know, how do people not know? How is it so obvious that like her husband is probably dead and she can't recognize it? She's told that she can't find him in this kind of small type of world. You know, all these sort of little holes here and there. But I think for me, the movie gave away to, you know, completely, and I was absolutely with it. So I think that's where I am with the movie, and I'm glad you guys all got to see it, and I'm glad, you know, Tony did bring up some of those points, but I don't want to hog the time. So Connor, do you want to say something?
I could say this may not be, you know, the right kind of line of questioning, but as I was watching it, at first I thought there may have been something like the narration is somehow from what he was reading in the beginning. You know, and that's sort of part of it. Yeah, there's a meta gesture there that somehow he is the character that was written about, or he identifies with this one character in the writings of Heinz. And then he goes on and lives Heinz's life in a way, albeit different, right? You know, sure, there's definitely a meta element there, but I found it all literally hung together. I mean, maybe Anthony's saying that there are hints as to what's not, you know, so like I was not watching it under the impression that it was in any way a dream, maybe on some higher level, like we can think of it as a kind of recapitulation of Heinz's life, or there's certainly meditation on what it means to kind of to inhabit someone else's life. But I thought it worked all on a very literal level of, you know, like this is just what happens, right? Maybe it's a little far-fetched, yeah, but like, so I'm curious, like if there are points, if you guys feel inclined, you don't have to take this up. Like there are points where that really does seem to break down and I kind of miss them.
Not for me, Connor. You know, I'm one to get frustrated at those types of moments. I surely am. And I've expressed my dismay over films that kind of obfuscate the truth or take rules and kind of shift and break them. But, you know, perhaps this is a film, and I am curious why Tony didn't gravitate toward it, because you know, I thought he would. I don't know. I think this might be a film that it's a vibe heavy film for sure. There's an element of nostalgia that it might be like a requisite kind of component to the viewing experience for some people. For me, it's like almost the German, or the, you know, these wide shots of the Mediterranean, and it's just so beautiful in Marseille, and the kind of the washed out colors. And then also what really kind of got me in the heart was just these intimate moments between these two people, that there's no truth as to really who they are, where they stand in the world, but literally it's just the physical moments that are transcending any sort of need for, an essential truth there. That's so haunting and yet beautiful. I wanted to say, I think this movie does try to twist and warp the truth because it's trying to make a statement, like Anthony said, about the fact that we can't, or I think Tony said it too, that we can't really comprehend the truth at times. Maybe it was all of you guys. Everyone said it. But, the idea, like, you look at little pieces like the mother who's from North Africa, she's deaf and she's a refugee, and her son has to sign to her that her husband died, or she takes pleasure from seeing someone else sing, not being able to hear, but seeing the humanity there. And so it's this kind of refraction that we know is like suboptimal. Like, we know that's like, oh, that's sad, because it would be much better if she could just hear him sing, or instead of having to see that. And I think the idea is that, for me, the implications of the truth are far more dangerous than the truth itself. You look at what I thought was the best dialogue from the film was him telling the American consulate about the last thing he'd written, which was from the manuscript. He said, where is hell? And the guy said, he's trying to find where hell is because he's supposed to go to hell. And the guy says, well, you're in it. So the idea is, like, that really kind of struck me. You're there, right? What you're fearing is the actual anticipation of this truth, instead of the you're fearing the consequences, you're fearing the outside edges of it, because we can't really grasp the truth, right, in this type of environment. And that's how we relate to each other, is through these kind of ancillary ways, through these tangential ways. And I thought it was really beautiful. But I thought it made sense all the way up until the end. Even it went back and forth. I was like, oh, it's too much like Casablanca. It's not, I thought they were going to escape, and the doctor is going to escape. It's going to be happily ever after. But then they get blown up by a mine on the sea. And that's a little dreamlike. But I think, the last shot is perfect. He turns around, he hears the door chimes, he turns around and he smiles. And to me, you can have many readings of that. It's almost like it reminded me of Emma Stone in Birdman when she looks up. Tony's gonna love that one.
I'm liking this.
The Sopranos.
No, yeah,
Sopranos
exactly.
ending.
Well, Sopranos.
Okay, now I like it again. Okay.
No, but to me, it's like, actually the police are there and he knows he's about to die. That's the reading I like, because he's beyond any sort of reconciliation with himself. He's suffered some intrapsychic damage. Go ahead, Tony.
No, but you talked about, I think there's kind of two different things there. The idea of truth, I think, is important, because I wrote down the last part of the line, at least, he was towards the end of the movie when he's going back to the doctor, when he has this kind of crisis and he's like, oh, I can't, and the minute I thought he'd kind of wussed out. He's like, he can't face a woman and be like, no, you don't understand. Your dad, your husband is dead. I am that guy. He kind of tries to like, see, this is my name here. She's like, that's great. I can't wait to see my husband. So he kind of bails out of the cabin. I'm like, wow, what a coward. He just, but then he realized he's trying to make it right. So he finds the doctor and it's like, no, please go with Marie. It's his little way of making it up. And he says, I had to make up a story. There was no time for he had to make up a story. There was no time for the truth, because it's not him who's narrating. Right. And it's kind of that idea of like, okay, the stories and the truth, and what is the truth. Right. And when he sees the American consul earlier in the movie, and he talks about his ambivalence about, quote unquote, being a writer. And of course, this guy isn't the writer. He's a different guy, but it's an interesting moment because he speaks with such authority and he speaks so passionately about this. It makes you wonder, that's one of those moments where like, wait, well, is he the guy? Is he a different writer? And this is a scene I actually did relate to, the idea of book reports, the idea of like, you'd have you have this experience. These people are experiencing these horrible atrocities. And when the writers experience them, it's almost just like material to them. Like, it's almost like they lose out on the actual, they experience it so like they can write about it. What I relate to about that is I remember, to make a personal connection here. Like, for instance, in high school, I did my like Guatemala service trip, and there was this kind of understanding / expectation that you would write about it for your college admissions essay. And I always found that really gross. And I made a point. I'm like, I am not going to write about it. I'm never going to write about the Guatemala service trip for my college admissions essay. Because to me, that was like, there was something really disgusting to me about not now. If someone went and did it, like, fine, great. I'm not judging you, but I'm saying, to me, I could never go to this foreign third world country, interact with these people who have horrible lives, so deprived, starving, living in squalor, come back to my comfortable American upper middle class life, and then write an essay about how much it meant to me. Like, that thought was to me like the equivalent of like selling my soul. Like, I would be giving up a piece of my humanity in doing that, which isn't to say that there aren't people who have this really profound experience and they're writing about it in an authentic way. But I just could not do that. So I felt I understood that character in that moment very deeply. But I think that there's this kind of ambivalence throughout the movie about narratives and about stories, and like, how do stories make sense of these horrible events? Maybe there is no way to make a story out of a horrible event. Maybe it's just a thing we just have to deal with. And I think another, I guess, admirable choice or interesting choice is the way that it doesn't put in a lot of like political context or political conversations. There's not a lot of conversations about like what the Nazis are doing and why they're doing it, yada, yada, yada. It's just kind of an understood thing, right? It's just like an event that's happening in the world, and we're just seeing how people have to deal with it. And I thought that was kind of a bold choice. The way it just kind of throws us into this situation in a way that makes it feel much more immediate, because it's like, But the other thing, Kirk, you kind of touched on with the hell story, which I also liked, was sort of to me, the movie felt very purgatorial. The idea of just like waiting, the idea that you can't, you're just there and I kind of knew he wasn't going to leave. I'm like, he has to stay there the whole time. And I almost wish the movie had started in Marseille for that reason. I'm sure Anthony will rebut me with a point about how it's actually perfect that he comes from the other place. And I'm sure he's correct. I'm not disputing that. But to me, it almost would have been more satisfying had he been there the whole movie and it had an almost circular structure, which it kind of does when he sees Marie at the end. But anyway.
Well, I'd say the movie needs that opening because he needs to transition from being a person to being someone else. It's the very simple thing. He has to lose his original personhood to gain the other part, for that purgatorial to be finalized, complete. He's never going to be who he is. He's never going to be who he was, and he's stuck in that sort of role. He's stuck just like those people in the embassies themselves, or the consulate, sorry. He's only able to tell stories. And in fact, people don't even want to hear those stories. They just want to tell them. That becomes kind of the key line of the narration too. But I think throughout the movie, and you touched on this with the hell anecdote and the book report part, is that's fundamentally kind of key to the kind of movie's logic itself, which is that there's a sort of tension between the narration and what's always happening, or between basic gestures and what could eventually be or what should be. That the woman is deaf, she can't hear the song. That people want to tell stories, no one wants to listen type thing. And in fact, if we look and like see some of the narration, which we eventually learn, at least most of it probably could be from the bartender himself, we have to kind of ask how much of the bartender's narration is actual to what's actually happening, or what did happen. What is the truth of his story? Because if we look very carefully, when he narrates things, there are moments when they don't line up with what's really happening. He talks about how they're like in this enthusiastic kiss, but we never actually see that kiss happen. We only see the holding of hands. He describes the one night, the one time the movie actually gives a hint about a physical passion. We actually don't see that, but we do see them laying down. And in fact, we see Marie fell asleep before anything could even happen. So there is a kind of a question of, do we stretch truths? Do we kind of belie them? What do we do to it to kind of make things seem, ready for an audience? And at times, we give inaccuracies because, real humanity cannot even be told. It's always the anticipation. And anticipation is what we are always having, but what we don't want to see, I think, in the movie. So that's actually my reading anyway of those parts. Sorry, Connor, did you want to say something?
No, I'm just ruminating on what you said, Anthony. No, it's very deep. I don't think I really accessed the movie on that level yet. I think it's definitely there to be found. I would just bring it back to plot, I guess. Would just be that, like, But I think it's very interesting the choice he makes, right? That the choice Georg makes, right, when he gets out of the car. It's strange because on some level, yes, he's making it right with the doctor, but the doctor's already seen that they were kissing, right? So clearly, I mean, it's deep because of the complexity of all these relationships, right? So that Marie, right, is trying to get back with Heinz, who she thinks is alive, and maybe that's why he leaves. That's why he doesn't think he has a place, right, in that car or on that ship with her going to Mexico, right? That ultimately, well, she really just does love her husband. After all, there's no chance, right? So I should stay here and let the doctor, whose place I originally sort of usurped, right, go. I mean, he's sort of doubly usurped, the spot on the ship, in a way. But again, it's also kind of pure sabotage because I don't think like the doctor would and Marie would ever be happy together, right? And that was a fleeting and illusory relationship, right? It was a stopover somehow for her, right? And I would
Doctor doesn't seem like excited to be going, really. He doesn't seem like, oh, thank God I can be with my love. He's like, I guess I'm doing this now. There you go.
Well,
yeah.
But he's also going to administer medicine, that's
Mexico as he planned, which he felt was really
like that's probably why he's the doctor, right, in the film, because otherwise he'd just be another schlub. Like he brings in the element of outside importance,
Yeah, and I think there's something also, and I feel like I've been saying this a lot, but very interesting about the journey to Mexico itself, because is there even the possibility of getting to Mexico if you really think about it? After all, there's no straightforward journey, they say. There's no ship that goes from France to Mexico. What you have to do is secure travel through other places. So there's also the fear and the realization that where you are in this place in France, in Marseille, ends up just being where you are in the next country or the next city or state, wherever you end up.
Sure, and I think the beginning helps with that, actually. Sorry, I wanted to mention that why does it start in, I guess it's Algeria, right? It's exactly it. It's almost the exact same kind of place. He's already at this stopping point, this transition point, and just goes one step further. But yeah, sorry, Anthony. Sorry, I couldn't help but chime in there.
Pretty sure it's Paris,
I thought he was in Paris.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry?
That's what I thought. I thought he was in Paris as well.
He's in Paris. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's in Paris on the letter that he delivers. He's in Paris.
Okay, sorry. Oof. Okay, a little different, but
yeah. No, I think though what I was just saying is, I think that you're onto something too. Is all you have is transit and the attempt at being out of that, but all you're doing is always on the move. You're always stuck, I guess, and that's kind of that. But let me ask you, Tony. You talked in the beginning, your quick take, that certain things frustrated you. Did we touch on any of that, or did you want to bring any up?
No, I mean, I guess I to me, it was more like there were a lot of moments like when you talked about the narration, right? With he says, and then they kissed and they don't kiss. And it's like, oh, that's an interesting thing, right? That's a little thing. You're poking at the audience, check this out. This is kind of interesting, right? This is different. There's a contrast between what I'm saying and what I'm showing you. And I'm like, okay. And then I didn't really see that again. You know what I mean? And I believe you that there are other things that kind of rhyme with that in the movie. I'm not saying that's not there. It's just I kept waiting for that. There were a lot of little things. It's you see the color red, right? And you're waiting for red to show up, and then you see green, and then you see blue. And I saw all these pretty colors, but they weren't the same, or they didn't complement each other, right? And I'm not saying the movie's bad. I'm not saying you're wrong. I believe that all these things are in the movie like you're saying it. I just kept I didn't see the way these elements did not come together or cause fear for me, or the scene I mentioned with the book report thing, right? I didn't see that. It didn't come together for me. In other words, I saw a lot of interesting moments, interesting scenes, but I couldn't put together a coherent real read of the movie, and even now, I'm listening to you talk about it and I'm like, oh, wow, I want to see that movie. I wish I'd seen that movie. You know what I mean? That sounds really good.
No, it's Tony, it's all fair. I mean, there is a movie that might be more up your alley, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. Kate Hudson, Matthew McConaughey, a little more straightforward. No, I'm kidding. Of course I'm kidding. I'm usually in your position, and that's true. So I can sympathize and empathize with you. And I think a lot of movies in the last 5 to 7 years are almost like an assemblage of scenes, right? And you lose the meta narrative. And I think that's where the actual narration helps in this movie to kind of congeal it for me. But I do understand what you're saying. There's like, you're meant to lean one way, and then, you know, you almost have to be ambidextrous, or, you know, and I think that's why you might have been in a different frame of mind for this watching. And even watching it for the first time tomorrow, you might have had a totally different experience. But it's
Right.
like an A24 experience, you know what I mean? It's like a bunch, like a lot of things have great importance and have meaning that you can really kind of suck out, but it just has to work for you. And you know,
Yeah.
and you know, I know another scene that we haven't mentioned. It's probably one of the most beautiful scenes I've seen. You know, most beautiful 3 minutes was the death by suicide of the dog watcher. You know, that was, and really took me off guard. And you know, it just goes to further the points we've kind of made throughout about, you know, she really, at the end, she kind of understood that constructing truth was the most important thing to her, and she was never going to be able to obtain whatever conditional absolution or satisfaction was available to her in life. So she wanted to kind of experience, you know, she says, I don't want to talk, I just want to eat with somebody. And I think that's like, that's scary, but that rings true to me, right? Like, wouldn't it just be nice to just sit with somebody and not have the expectation of having to talk to them? I think that's, you know, that's really beautiful and haunting. And there's a lot of pieces throughout this movie about like modern existence. So it's a very modern film in that way. But
I agree, Kirk. I think that's a great moment. And I'll just say one of my favorites is, and we haven't talked about this too much because of time, but one of my favorite moments is the boy he kind of takes care of. And when he goes back after the boy's probably healed and stuff by now, he goes to their apartment, he knocks on the door, and they're gone. And all he sees is the group of kind of refugees. And they're so ambiguous as to what they could be, Middle Eastern, Syrian, Eastern European, whatever they are. But he just sees the group of them, and none of them are that boy. And he's just lost, and he gives up. That boy's kind of seemingly disappeared from the film itself, the way all these kind of people have, you know, lost others. And I just think that also is kind of a fearful, you know, existential moment also of like how modern condition works. A modern society kind of functions with the idea that you could see people but never quite know them, and that's haunting itself too. But anyway, we could kind of move to final thoughts and then voting. I don't want to take up too much time before we get to the next process. Don't you want to go first?
I don't want to go first. Well, obviously, you know, I was leaning no, but then at the very no, I mean, I gotta go no. I mean, you know what it is, right? I mean, I believe you guys. I don't think this is a bad film or anything. It just did not. It really just didn't resonate with me at all, and I can't vote yes for that reason. So pass it along.
Let me just
that's
say,
fair.
Has any sort of argumentation ever persuaded you, Tony? I'm not saying this is a bad point. I'm just saying I know like Connor has been persuaded, Kirk has. I haven't. I'm trying to think of.
You don't think? Well, I think sometimes I think so. I think sometimes I'm like more like even last time, like Place in the Sun, because I was kind of leaning no. And then as we talked about it more, I'm like, oh no, I remember this. And oh, I like this. Like sometimes in our conversation, I'll make more connections and remember more things, and it'll kind of enhance my fondness for the movie. I didn't make those connections, if that makes sense. I wasn't like listening to you talk about like, oh my God, yeah, that's right. There was that one scene. I was kind of like, yeah, I mean, I guess, like, you know, I feel like I sound very negative, but that's just, I mean, that's how I think, you know.
Negative. No, we'll move on to Connor.
I was gonna say I should go last, but because
You
frankly,
can go last. I'll just go.
sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, you're deciding. I see. Okay. Oh no! Don't let this stick in the mud Tony bring you down. This movie better get in. No, I'm kidding, Tony. I'm voting yes, but I can totally empathize with what Tony's saying, and it's one of those things where this was me with Blue Velvet, this was me with Cachet, this was me with 18 movies. So it's not really anything to be alarmed. If anything, it's invigorating, right? Because the inherent subjectivity of it all, it makes it that much more special, right? And I think highlights what we're talking about in this movie is that we're like 3 judges on a boxing ring, or 4 judges in this case, at a boxing match. And the reason they're on different sides is because they all have a different perspective. And that's where we are. We all have our own perspectives. And I think that's the whole point of this. So yeah, for me, just the little things, like I don't know why, but the way they embraced in that first time they started kissing it almost made me cry, and I don't know why. And so to me, that's like when art does something unexpected like that to you, and it must have been the preceding events, right? Or just the physicality of it, then you have to stop and take note. And so it did that for me, and I can thank it for that. So yeah, it's a yes.
Well, very well put, Kirk. And you're invited to my wedding. Tony, got lots in the mail. How are you feeling? Are you going to give us this?
We'll see. No, ditto to what Kirk said. Everything's very subjective. For example, I've been pretty positive so far, but there were some choices in the movie that I felt like were really like missed opportunities. For example, why are they taking a ship? If it's the modern day, if you're trying to do like a modern day World War II, why aren't they on a plane? And they get blown up by a mine, like it gives it away. You know what I mean? Like this makes sense. Like why?
Not like this, Connor.
I thought they were taking a spin.
Not like this.
Why wasn't it a drone? Like that would have been cool, right? And then also, like when they having a cigarette with the dog lady, when Georg is, why aren't they vaping? Like it's just obvious. And no, I'm kidding. Okay, so I love how this movie did this. This is one of the aspects that I love the most about it. Really, is the way it does the setting. But there's so many more things to recommend it. I have to agree with Kirk. It was on a very subjective level. I found those love scenes very moving, or love or not love. And I think the tone and a lot of the signifiers and a lot of the spirit of the movie, added up to more than maybe the sum of its parts. Though I think there is a lot there, and I think Anthony is showing the path by which I could further analyze this movie and find some hidden riches, but just on a very visceral, unreflective level. I love it. It's a yes.
All right, great. It is in the 706, and I'm glad you guys got to see this after. I feel like I've been recommending it to Kirk at least for like 2 years or something like that. It's been a while. I think I recommended it to Tony similarly, but maybe it was good he did not take up the film until now. But anyway, we'll move on to the final section, and which these 3 are going to nominate a movie and see which one I pick. But who went least recent? Was it
Tony?
All right, I'll go last. Why don't we have Kirk, Connor, then me?
All right. So Anthony, I have an instant win in my pocket, but I don't think I'm going to use it because I went last week and I don't want to test my luck. So I'm going to hold my instant win for the next time you're hosting. But that's not to undercut the movie I'm bringing to the table. And that movie is, let me just make sure I have the right. Actually,
interesting.
Wait.
I like it.
No, it's.
This is how you get picked with Anthony. He loves doing these.
Well, it's yeah. Okay, I shouldn't say anything more about it. What is the movie? Can Connor? Can you go first? I'm actually having a total aneurysm right now.
You don't remember the movie that's an instant win? Oh wait,
no, not.
No. This one's not the instant win.
The surrogate. The surrogate.
This is the burner pick. We all have those. Well, I did not go least recently, but I'm not pulling any punches here, guys. I've got something that's pure Anthony bait. Well, maybe. I think it's Anthony bait. I don't know if it's an Anthony movie. I'm talking about 1989's Heathers. Okay, kind of a cult teen film. It's a little bit subversive. The original pitch for the script was the teen movie that Kubrick should have made, or that he wanted Kubrick to make. So just obviously, I mean, maybe you've heard a little bit about it. It's kind of a cult film with some, classic lines, but sort of a satire of the sort of social issues of teens. It's very irreverent, very comical, but also with a lot of sort of social commentary. And of course, the pièce de résistance, or I should say that Anthony cannot Resistance is, of course, Winona Ryder, very early career. She was 19 when this film was made, and in a very Anthony appealing role, I would say, as we'd see if we watched it. But I think it has something for all of us. I think it has some of the irreverence, the social commentary. I think it has an element of just kind of social incisiveness, kind of unsentimental incisiveness into social issues that I think Kirk would enjoy. So I think it has something for all of us.
I missed the title of the film, by the way.
Heathers.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought you were nominating. All right. So I did find the name of the film, but I think I'm gonna save it for Tony. Just I'm giving you a little insight into my thought process.
Okay, I'll have to remember this.
How about I go with something Anthony? You know, this is more of an Anthony pick, and this is no throwaway. Let me say that. He actually probably hates it, but he might not have seen it, in which case he might be intrigued. Gus Van Zant's Last Days. Tony laughs. No, have you seen it? Of course, Anthony, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, of course.
I remember talking about it with you. And,
well, there we go. This movie stars a little someone. His name is Michael Pitt. I am the president of his fan club. Michael Pitt playing a facsimile, nameless, well, not nameless, but a kind of broken image of Kurt Cobain in the days preceding his suicide. It's a very alienating, very eerie, raw, and ultimately disquieting film. And there are some great moments, and I think the acting on display will give us a good opportunity to talk about my man Michael Pitt, but you know, that's neither here nor there. Of course, also we could talk about the man who personified the 90s, even though he was only alive for 3 years and 4 months of them, that being Kurt Cobain. So I hope we do get to talk about something along those lines. You know, I love talking about Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, so maybe in the future, but if it not today, but that's my choice.
All right, interesting. So what do you got, Tony?
Guys, I'm having a really hard time. I'm having a really, really hard time, but I'm gonna go with something that a little bit nervous to pitch because there's like no way to watch it. So if you don't pick me for that reason, I'll understand it. But it was inspired partially by Connor's pick for Heathers. I'm like, okay, we're going dark comedy. I got to crank up the darkness. I got to crank up the comedy to the most blackened, horrid places they can go. The most disturbing film I've ever seen is Happiness by Todd Solondz. I've been wanting to do a Todd Solondz movie for forever. And this is can I say it's a 90s classic. It is a horribly uncomfortable movie with a great cast. You got the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, a lot of other people. But I've spent a few years since I've seen it, and it obviously made a big impression on me. I mean to watch it again. And this and Dark Horse are kind of the two kind of defining Todd Solondz movies. And I don't know, I'm in a bit of a Joker mood, guys. I've been on the Murray Franklin show, and
Joker side, Tony. What happened, Tony?
So
what woman made you do this?
I don't know.
No wonder you didn't like transit, you fucking incel.
I think it's the other way around. I think it's the transit made me pick this.
All right. So 16-year-old me is in love.
Wait, we get to rebut.
Oh, yes. But
oh, okay.
You can have the
rebutting.
I gotta give my little spiel about what that. 16-year-old me is in love with two of these movies. You got Winona, you got Kurt. 18-year-old me is in love with Tony's pick, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Todd Solondz. So let's see. I need some rebuttals, but I got to start with the obvious quote here for Connor is, "What's the damage, Heather? Why should I pick your movie?" And we'll go there.
Well, Anthony, I think it just recommends itself for the podcast. I think it's just all around. I think we can interface with a large kind of cult following, right? It has this kind of interpretation built up around it too. And I think it's fun to get in on that kind of movie. And certainly it just kind of fits. I feel like with our canon, and also it's in some ways it retreads some ground that we've already covered. in terms of some of its themes. You may look back to World's Greatest Dad. It maybe is kind of most similar. I think World's Greatest Dad is, partially sort of taking off from, the sort of concept of Heathers. But I think it's really interesting. And I think this time I'm going to bring something that I haven't really seen, which is, it's not my full reading of the movie, but it's kind of a cultural historical reading of the movie, where I am tempted to claim, perhaps hyperbolically, that Heathers is the first film of the 90s, whereas Last Days encapsulates Kurt Cobain, who is the essence of the 90s. In some ways, Heathers is what predicts the 90s. Like, all of the 90s is contained in Heathers in a way, even though it was made in 89. And I think, I'm not sure what Anthony will think about it. I think this is the kind of direction he'd like to go in. So I'll tantalize him with that. I have nothing to say against Happiness, because nothing to say against Happiness, because I love the film. And I would say, in Tony's defense, it's not simply shock. It's not simply jokerism. I think it's a great film.
He's my attorney over here. He's like, ignore everything my client has said. Didn't mean it. I'm like, yes, I did. Like, shut up. And
I would love to watch it, but we're gonna have to, I don't know what we're gonna have to do. We're gonna have to drive somewhere together to some back alley.
That's the thing. That's the issue. But yeah.
So I will just say that Last Days was actually the inspiration for Star Wars, since we're doing clickbait for our nominations. God. He did this with Yojimbo, you son of a bitch. No, I don't have any clickbait.
It must have inspired the Phantom Menace, Kirk, so that would be bad. Temporally, right?
Well, no, it was actually Rian Johnson watched it. And Last Jedi now is like, it's meta now, even though it was hated when it came out. So yeah, Last Days, Anthony, you know what it is. And if it's something you feel like talking about, I would love to engage in that conversation. And I think Tony has seen it. I don't remember if you liked it or not. You haven't seen it?
No.
Okay. That's another thing. That's another thing to, it's a real kind of exploration of mental health. They're like true budding psychosis, in a way, and rampant drug abuse, and kind of a dislocation from society that is obviously coincides well with the themes that we work in about unreality on this podcast. And then you mix in the element of fame, and the expectation of fame, and the cult of personality, as the song goes, of course. And I think it's a great repudiation of those things in a way, and it does feel still modern. It obviously is, but it does feel like it brings Kurt Cobain into this century in a way, or into this decade, in a way. So that's what I'll say.
Tony, did you want to say anything else? Or?
Well, Heathers is the first movie of the 90s. Then Happiness is the last movie of the 40s.
Interesting.
I think that pretty much. Now I gotta back that up. Now I gotta figure that out.
Yeah.
It's gonna work. I don't know. I just think it's another one that's like
all white
really
cast.
What?
All white cast, you could say.
Yeah.
But I know
wasn't the last.
You guys both seen it? Kirk, have you seen it?
I haven't seen it, no.
I'm very, very, very curious.
Oh.
What Kirk? No, I'm really curious what Kirk's gonna think of it. I'm really curious. And I don't know. I think it's just one of the ones. It's on the ones that the fans need it. The fans need a Happiness episode.
Our parents.
Yes, they do. We can talk.
We really need to watch it.
But yeah, the title. No spoilers, Kirk. But the title is a bit ironic. It is a black comedy. It is a pitch black comedy. Very uncomfortable. But it's I don't know. I think it's one of the most interesting and weird movies of the 90s. It's very funny, while also being horrifying, and I think it gets at a lot of kind of dark truths. And I think it's worth exploring. So that's it. I can't say it's better than the other ones, but Heathers is very good. Heathers will be a good choice. I haven't seen Last Days, but yeah.
All right. So there's pluses and minuses to all of these. I'd love to talk about a Kurt Cobain, or have a Kurt Cobain episode. I feel like that would be a Kirk and me, though, heavy special, which I would love. I don't know if Last Days is necessarily the movie to do it, but maybe it would recuperate a bit, on this rewatch. Maybe he'd have some takes. Maybe you guys would too. Happiness, maybe I want an episode where I want to feel happy, and I don't know if that's the movie to do it. Also, if you would have listened in a little bit, I feel like there's other Todd Solondz movies I'd rather rewatch or watch for the first time, even if happiness could be found. So I don't know. Heathers, it's been so long. I'd be fearful if I'm still going to like it, if it's going to get tarnished in my head a little. I do love Renona, though, so that's an obvious selling point. So I'm going to say F Me Gently with a Chainsaw, because I'm picking
Excellent.
Heathers.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, I think I'm curious. I had imagined you must have seen it, but I'm glad there's some time has elapsed. And yeah, I think there'll be things you might be surprised going back and watch things you might like, things you might not like. I had the same experience, although I never watched it a long time ago. I watched it like in college, like only a couple of years ago. But I always find it interesting to revisit. And I'd be really curious what you think of, even if you don't necessarily love it, to pieces.
We haven't done an 80s movie in a while, I think. Right?
Yeah.
That's kind of my other point.
It's kind of in the Crybaby tradition too. It's like Crybaby meets World's Greatest Dad. So
it sort of is. Yeah. Yeah.
It's also
you haven't seen it,
folks. It's also, and we're going to be expecting a written report, Connor, but it's also the first movie of the 90s. So you've been promised that for next week. No, I have not seen it, and I'm just joking, Connor, but I am interested to hear your take and to see the movie. Even though I'm not a big fan of Miss Ryder, I don't know why. Maybe the whole shoplifting fiasco kind of tainted her for me.
We'll see. And guys, yeah, I'd be totally excited to watch it with you. I can't wait to unfold my elaborate idle cultural musings of many like think piece blog style, sort of half formed thoughts. But I think there'll be a lot to unpack too, just on the level of plot. I think there's a lot to talk about, right? Just in about the movie itself, regardless of any of those exterior sort of cultural arguments. But it's also a movie that's fun to kind of interpret. But yeah, I really look forward to seeing it with you guys next episode.
Cool. And I'll have what she's having.
Wow, we got a gamer over here.
Fuck
Kirk,
you.
you look like you were just leaving comments on a Brie Larson interview. That's the look you got right now.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Maybe I pride myself on audio integrity. Okay.
Okay. No, that's all
You're
right.
a little sweatier if that was the case, I think.
Yeah.
Your mouth would be perpetually burned from biting into a hot pocket too eagerly.
Fuck you.
It's okay. I used to eat hot pockets. You used to tease me about my hot pocket habits. Or was that someone else? I think it was Tyler. I used to
I
buy
never
them.
even.
What?
I never even ate hot pockets. I only ate lean pockets.
I ate lean pockets too, but then I had hot pockets once or twice. I'm like, these are so much better. Like way better.
There's just no comparison. Yeah.
I know. It's sad, isn't it?
No going back. Yeah. Once you get to the hot pockets level,
Yeah, exactly.
lean pockets are just a gateway drug.
Did you get the breakfast lean pockets, Kirk?
No, those are disgusting.
Really? I like the breakfast ones. Which one did you get? I like meatball marinara. That was probably my favorite.
Okay, I haven't had a hot pocket in 18 months. Just clarifying, but
You got your chip? Did you get your HA chip?
yeah, it's called I lost 100 pounds. Probably the ham one. The ham one.
Ham and cheese, really? I was never
Yeah.
into that one. But
That's because you were doofus. You didn't like them. You weren't a true fan.
was that the real heads like ham and cheese?
Yeah.
The posers like, if I like meatball marinara, that's like your favorite Radiohead song being Creep. It's like you're not even a real fan, basically.
It's pretty much.
Okay, I see.
You're right. Yeah.
Oh, okay, well, there you go.
I'm ready.
That
when
logic
you
go
guys-
around. I want the real Radiohead fans to be really into Creep. That'll be the thing.
Oh, kind of a weird reverse Creep love. That's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Where it's the most popular song, and you'd be trying to impress people by liking it. Like, yeah, I like that one too. But like, no, you don't understand. I'm not supposed to like it. More.
Well, you didn't ask me why I like it.
I like it in a more profound way than you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good.
All right.